Well, it turns out that my work with Bruce Lipton, who wrote a book called Biology of Belief, is really about how our story, how our beliefs, how the things that may not even be true but we mistake for reality, how these have an impact on our lives. And, you know, we can see this very simply in the placebo effect. Len mentioned this earlier. At 1/3 of the cases, when people are given a sugar pill and told that it's a medicine that's going to help them with their illness, they recover. Now, of course, the drug companies aren't interested in selling placebos, so they try to get rid of the placebo effect. But the fact is that this is something that if we put our hearts and mind to it, we could cultivate this tool of how the mind can have control over the body. We've also read stories of, every now and then you'll read a story in a paper about some woman whose child is trapped under a car, and somehow a 110-pound woman can lift a 3,000-pound car to free her child. Now, where does this energy come from? There's no logical, linear, physical explanation for it. You know, even to say, well, she had a rush of adrenaline, that doesn't really explain very much. So there are many things that we don't understand about how our beliefs impact our biology and our reality. So in spontaneous evolution, we look at two things. First of all, the realization that much of what we believe is actually based on false science. And I'm not going to go into deep detail about this here during the course of the series. I'll explain more about it. But suffice it to say that if we look at the model for evolution, we recognize that every phase of evolution, from the first single-cell organisms to our very complex 50 trillion cell organism that we call you and me, every phase of evolution has involved two things: expanding awareness and expanding connection. And so as Bruce and I conclude in our book, the next phase of human evolution is recognizing, again, by expanding our awareness and connection, that we are each and all cells in a new organism called humanity. And this organism is attuned with the power of love, which Len will talk to you more about in a little bit. So what I want to wrap up with in regards to this spontaneous remission, the spontaneous evolution that we're talking about has to do with a spontaneous remissioning, changing our mission from every person for themselves to we're all in this together, to resonate with this idea that we're cells in this one organism, this one body of humanity. And the exciting thing about this series is that we're really going to talk about how individually we can weave our own passion, our own vision, our own mission, our own gifts and skills into this newly emerging organism. So there is a metaphor that Bruce and I use, and it's actually more than a metaphor because it occurs in nature, to describe where we are right now. It is the transformation of the caterpillar to the butterfly. Now, the caterpillar is a very successful organism, and very much like our own consumer society, it consumes a lot. It eats and eats, and then at some point, this once successful society and civilization called caterpillar begins to reconstruct because something new is being born. And in this period of reconstruction, we can imagine it as being very chaotic. We can imagine things falling apart, just as we look at the institutions of our society, whether they be the education institutions, which actually make children stupider, or the healthcare system, which is unfortunately largely unhealthy and uncaring, or the banks, and we won't even go into the banks right now. So we're noticing that all of these institutions seem to be falling apart, but something else is falling together. So when the caterpillar begins to deconstruct, these new cells that are called imaginal cells begin to pop up. And these imaginal cells are the first butterfly cells. And at the beginning, they're isolated. They're separated. They don't survive. But at some point, they begin communicating with one another. They begin connecting. They form community. They form network. and at some point there's a critical mass, and the caterpillar transforms into the butterfly. Now, what's so interesting about this is that the caterpillar and the butterfly have the exact same DNA. They're the same organism. The only difference is they are receiving a different signal. So now let's look at our human society. I would suggest that the people who are on this call right now are the imaginal cells of this new organism called humanity that's being born. And again, if you look at the news, out there, it's all caterpillar. It's all caterpillar out there. But the butterfly organism is something that is being built. It's something that's being interwoven. And this class is really about weaving a web of mass construction and regrowing the garden and having a heaven of a time doing it. So Peter, I'm going to hand this over to you to talk more about the alchemical process and a little bit more of the alchemical background for this series.
If nothing else, I really hope that our listeners get that, because sometimes the journey that we're on in this chaotic time seems a very lonely mission, and we seem to be different and separate from other people. And this imaginal cell story is so important, that there are people like you all over the world awakening at incredible rates. And what we need to do is to start coming together in communities of imaginal cells so that we can offer each other mutual support. And that really is what this TelEVENT tonight is all about, and the ongoing 7 weeks. And so I just want to continue explaining and describing a little bit about the way in which the alchemical process works, for you to understand that process and then to see how we're going to work with that process over the next few weeks. So if you imagine for a moment as a human being that you have these 7 chakra points, which are essentially where the nerve networks in the bodies come along the spine and are also connected to different glands within the body. And if we divide those chakras up into the 3 lower chakras, that would be the one at the base of the spine, the one on the spine where the pelvic girdle reaches the spine, and the one right behind the solar plexus on the spine, just above the navel. Those are the 3 lower chakras. And then we have the heart chakra, which we'll consider on its own. And then we have the 3 upper chakras in the throat, the third eye, right above the eyebrows, but it's actually right in the center of the brain. So if you take a point from your crown chakra right on the top of your head and go down into your head and go at right angles from the middle of your eyebrows, slightly higher than that, then that's where the 6th chakra resides. So see it as a 3 lower chakra, heart chakra, 3 upper chakras. And the 3 lower chakras, if you can imagine this picture, if you are thinking about your heart space, then the 3 lower chakras are below the level of your heart space. They are dictated by and controlled by the unconscious. And these 3 chakras are what some people call the lower human ego. And they have within these 3 chakras all the programs that have been fed into you, particularly up to the age of 7. Now, we're not looking to blame anybody here in this particular process, but your parents, because of the way they were trained, because of the way their families worked, when you were a young child, at least one of your parents would have been offering you not unconditional love, but some form of conditional love. That meant there was an agenda attached to their love for you, whatever that was. And again, we're not blaming them. It's not deliberate. It's the way they were trained, and it's their programs. So we end up as an adult human being, having all these programs that were inserted into us before we were the age of 7, and we keep reinforcing those programs as we get older, particularly when we have challenging experiences, or in particular, if we have traumatic experiences. So we have all of this unconscious maelstrom of energy moving around our lower chakras which come from our unconscious. And as Deepak Chopra says, the trouble with the unconscious is it's unconscious. We don't know that it's there. We don't know that it's operating. It's below the surface. And so the first thing that we need to do in our transformation process is to clear out those 3 chakras. Those 3 chakras need to be cleared of all of the distortions that are keeping us from moving into our highest path. A classic, probably one of the most classic examples would be a feeling of I am not worthy. I am unworthy to have exactly what I want in the world. All of the abundance, the happiness, a happy family, happy relationships, all my needs being met. And we get to a certain point and we end up self-sabotaging ourselves and things don't work for us. That's because deep down in that unconscious, at some point you have a belief that you are not worthy. And it doesn't matter what you say in the outer world, and it doesn't matter what your conscious mind says, because your unconscious and your conscious don't operate in the same way. So what we need to do with those 3 lower chakras is delve into those chakras and clear them so that you can end up moving through that. You can even feel this now, moving through those 3 chakras up into the heart space, releasing all of those programs that have been holding you back, preventing you from being the person that you really, really are in your full empowered state. And I'll go a little bit more into some of the details in a moment, but right now I'm just giving the overview. So let us assume now then that you have managed to access and release those patterns, those repeating patterns that are preventing you from being who you really are and your highest vibration on the planet. So now we move up into the heart chakra, and now when we're in the heart chakra, because we've cleared out those lower vibrations, we can now resonate with the love in our heart. And this is where Leonard Laskow is the master. He understands real love, unconditional love, the vibration of love, better than anybody I've ever met. He can even get bacterial cells and cancer cells to behave through the vibration of love. And so when you go into that heart space, you learn how to go into that vibration of peace and love in your heart. And once you've mastered that, you can then move up to the 3 upper chakras. And that's where the fun really begins. Unfortunately, in our historical background, as a result of all the things that have happened over the last 2,000 years, 2 things have taken place for the Western world humanity. We got separated from nature. We got cut off at the knees as far as nature was concerned. And we got cut off from spirit, because the church expected us to go through a third party, otherwise known as the priest. And it was the priest that made that direct connection to source on your behalf. Well, guess what? The priests were not making that connection for themselves, let alone for you. And so you now have the right, the absolute right, to reconnect yourself to spirit directly. You do not need anybody else, including Glenn, Steve, and me, to do this for you. In fact, we can't do it for you. You are the only person that can reconnect yourself to your higher self, to your connection to source and to spirit. So once you have learned how to go into the heart and the love vibration in your heart, then you can start accessing the 3 upper chakras through the throat, through the third eye, and through the crown. And now you can start making this connection to what I call the invisible realms. And these are all the beings of light that exist out beyond the veil that was drawn over us when we incarnated on the planet. Many, many of you as little children saw the fairies, had an imaginary friend who wasn't imaginary at all, that was as real as anybody to you. And we got taken away from those beliefs and those knowings by our system, by our families, by our school friends.